Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're talking about something that's super relevant to all of us.
Yeah.
How our brains work, and how those thought processes can sometimes lead us astray.
It's all about cognitive biases, right? Those
Yeah.
fascinating little quirks in our thinking that we all fall prey to.
Exactly. And today's bias is a classic, the streetlight effect.
Oh, I love this one. It's such a great example of how we sometimes oversimplify things.
Right. It's like that old joke, you know the one, right?
Mm-hmm.
About the guy searching for his keys under the streetlight.
Yeah. Even though he lost them somewhere else.
Yeah. Let's say a policeman sees this guy searching frantically under a streetlight.
Hmm.
The policeman walks up and asks, "What are you looking for?"
And the guy's like, my keys!
Exactly. They search together, no luck. Finally, the policeman's like, "Are you even sure you lost them here?" And the guy says, "Nope, I lost them in the park."
But the light's better here. Classic.
Right. It's funny, but it also makes you think.
Because we do this all the time, right? We focus on the easy information, the stuff right in front of us, even if it's not the most helpful.
So this streetlight effect, it's more than just a joke. It's a real thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recognized cognitive bias, and it impacts our decisions all the time.
Wow, okay. So when did this term even come about? When did people start talking about the streetlight effect?
Well, the term itself popped up in the social sciences around 1964, but the idea, the concept, has been around much longer, as you can see from that old joke.
That makes sense. So beyond the joke, let's get a bit more formal here. What exactly is the streetlight effect? Like, what's the official definition?
Okay, so the streetlight effect is basically a type of observational bias. It happens when we prioritize information that is easy to get, even if it's not the best or most complete information. We ignore stuff that's harder to find, even if it's more relevant.
It's like we're looking for a specific book in a huge library, but we only search the shelves closest to the entrance because it's easier.
A perfect analogy, we might miss the best books that way.
And that's the problem with the streetlight effect, right?
Yeah.
We get these limited perspectives, and it impacts the choices we make.
Exactly. It's everywhere, honestly.
Like where? Give us some examples.
Well, we see it in science, healthcare, even in just our everyday lives.
Wait, science? Really? I would have thought that scientists, they're all about data and objectivity. How could they fall for this?
Oh, they do. I mean, they're human after all. Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist, even talked about this. He said, science is a bit like the joke about the drunk who is looking under a lamppost for a key that he has lost on the other side of the street because that's where the light is. It has no other choice.
So even scientists can get stuck looking in the wrong places just because it's easier? It's kind of unsettling.
It is. It highlights how important it is to be aware of this bias. We all need to make a conscious effort to look beyond the obvious.
So how do we do that? How do we stop ourselves from just looking under the streetlight? That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we all do this streetlight effect thing, right? We focus on the easy stuff, the obvious stuff. Like, how do we break that habit?
It's tough. Our brains are kind of wired to take the easy route, but being aware of the bias is a great first step.
So awareness is key.
Definitely. The first step is admitting that we don't know everything.
Humility, right?
Mm.
Like knowing that we might be missing something.
Exactly. Once we admit that, then we can start looking for those missing pieces.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to challenge what we think we know.
But how do we even know where to start looking?
Well, one thing that helps is diversifying where you get your information from.
Like, don't just read one news website or listen to one podcast.
Exactly. Expose yourself to different viewpoints,
Well.
Read stuff you don't agree with, stuff that challenges your thinking.
Okay, so like, read a variety of news sources and stuff. But even then, how can we be sure we're not still falling for this streetlight effect? Like, what if those sources are biased too?
Well, that's where critical thinking comes in. Don't just blindly accept everything you read or hear, right? Question it. Think about who wrote it, why they might have written it that way. Look for evidence to back up their claims.
So be skeptical.
In a healthy way. Be curious, be discerning, look for the whole picture, not just the easy pieces.
Okay, that makes sense. So diversify our information, then analyze it carefully. What else can we do?
Talk to people, have real conversations, especially with folks who have different views than you.
Ooh, that's tough.
It can be, but it's so valuable. You might learn something new, you might even change your mind about something, and even if you don't, you'll gain a better understanding of where other people are coming from.
And that helps us avoid the streetlight effect. How?
Because it forces us to consider other perspectives, right?
It broadens our understanding of the issue. We
Yeah.
start to see beyond just our own limited viewpoint. So diversifying our information, being critical thinkers, and engaging in thoughtful conversations. Those are some good strategies. But let's be honest, sometimes we're just busy, right? We don't always have time to do a deep dive on everything. So how can we, quickly check ourselves to make sure we're not falling for this bias?
Ask yourself some simple questions whenever you're facing a decision or forming an opinion.
Like what?
Okay, so first, what am I missing here? Is there more to the story?
Looking beyond the obvious. Got it.
Then, what information do I need that I don't have? That will help you figure out where to look, what questions to ask.
Okay, so that's two questions. Any others?
Yeah, this one's important. What biases might be influencing my thinking right now?
So acknowledge that we all have biases. It's tough to admit sometimes.
It is, but it's crucial. Once we know our biases, we can start to work around them. We can make sure they're not clouding our judgment.
Wow, okay. Diversifying our information, critical thinking, thoughtful conversations, and checking ourselves with those questions, that's a lot to remember.
It is. But the good news is, it gets easier with practice. The more you do it, the more it becomes a natural part of how you think and make decisions.
So we're basically training our brains to think beyond the streetlight.
Exactly. We're learning to see the world in a more nuanced, complex, and ultimately more accurate way.
I like the sound of that. So how do we know if we're actually making progress? What are some signs that we're overcoming this bias?
Well, you'll probably find yourself becoming more open to new ideas, more willing to consider different perspectives, even if they clash with your own. You'll be less likely to jump to conclusions and more likely to ask questions.
So basically, we'll become more intellectually humble.
Exactly. You'll start to see the streetlight effect everywhere, too, not just in your own life.
Cool.
You'll notice it in the media, in politics, and everyday conversations.
We're kind of like becoming experts at spotting this bias.
In a way, yeah. But remember, nobody's perfect. We all have biases, and we're all susceptible to the streetlight effect. The key is to be aware of it and keep working on it.
So it's a lifelong journey of learning and self-improvement.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay, well, I feel like I've learned a lot already. But before we wrap up, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about how this streetlight effect plays out on a larger scale. How does it impact society as a whole?
Ooh, that's a great question. And we'll explore that in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've talked about how this streetlight effect thing can mess with our personal decisions, but you were saying that it goes even bigger, right? Like societal stuff, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about big decisions, like the ones that governments make, policy stuff.
Oh, okay. So if they're only focusing on the easy information, what happens?
Well, they might miss important stuff. They might create solutions that, they sound good and they look good at first.
But they don't really work.
Yeah, they might not last. Or they might not actually fix the real problem. It's like, imagine you're putting a bandage on a broken leg.
Ooh, yeah. Makes you feel better, but doesn't fix the bone.
Right. It's not a long-term solution.
So you're saying that because of this bias, some policies might not actually help the people they're supposed to help.
Exactly. And then think about the news, too.
Okay, how does it play into that?
Well, think about how they choose what stories to cover, who they interview, all that stuff.
So they could be shining a light on only one side of the story.
Yeah. And that can create a really skewed view of what's actually going on. It can even make stereotypes worse,
Because we're not getting the whole picture.
Right. And then that can lead to, people arguing more division in society.
Man, that's kind of depressing. So what can we even do about it? When it comes to the news and stuff, how do we break free from that limited perspective?
We have to be really careful about what we read and what we watch, right?
Mhm.
Question everything. Think about who's telling the story, why they might be telling it that way.
So like we were talking about before, being media detectives.
Exactly. Look for other sources, other perspectives. Don't just take one person's word for it.
And what about on a bigger level? Can we do anything to change how these big decisions are made? The policy stuff.
Well, that's where voting comes in, right? Make sure you're informed about the issues and support leaders who are, actually trying to look at all sides of the problem.
So even though this streetlight effect is everywhere, it's not like we're doomed, right? There are things we can do.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It starts with awareness. Once you know about this bias, you can start to catch yourself doing it, and then you can start to make more informed choices.
Okay, so it all goes back to that first step, that awareness.
Right. And remembering that there's always more to learn. Don't be afraid to challenge your own beliefs.
And keep searching for those answers, even if they're not right under the streetlight.
Exactly. That's how we grow, how we make the world a better place.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
Just remember, stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to venture outside of your comfort zone. You never know what you might discover.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everyone.